Hello, I'm Michael Dennin, Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning and Dean of the Division of Undergraduate Education here at UCI. And this is Conversations with the Vice Provost, where I sit down with colleagues, friends, and discuss things of interest to the UCI community, the state, the nation, and I even like to say the world. And with me today, I'm so excited to have Wray, Professor of Dance, and something I'm very excited about, creator of Embodiology. And if you don't know what that is yet, you will find out by the end of our conversation. So Amma, great to have you here.
Fantastic. Thank you for the invitation, Michael.
You're welcome.
Excited too.
I'm going to jump right in because my first topic I sort of sent you was interesting because I sent you a topic and you sent back that you need to think about it, which was cool. And the general topic is exploration. It's become a theme of mine that I'm like, we tell our students college is about exploration. And then sometimes we create barriers accidentally or on purpose to their exploration. And when I think of dance, I think of exploration. You know, as you know, and people have seen other things of me, one of my youngest children was a big dancer through most of her life. And I love dance, and I make many attempts at dance. And it just strikes me as a fundamentally exploration-focused thing. So I was intrigued when you said, oh, you know, there's elements of competition and other things in the dance major. So I'm going to just start, and you can do whatever you want with the broad question of how well does exploration work in the undergraduate dance major, maybe particularly at UCI?
Well, it's a huge question. Because
no, it is, and you can pick any part of it you want.
It really is. And I would say that as a student moves through their major, there are more opportunities for exploration to be fully cohered. What do I mean by that? When students first come in, they're immediately ranked.
Oh, okay.
Right? So
oh, wow.
They've auditioned to come into the school. And then they have another audition once they arrive to be put into the level of technique that fits where they're at. And it's really a model to enable the students to move at the level that they are ready to move in or we perceive. But they can also perceive that as a moment of, oh, this is defining who I am.
Yeah.
Right? And so that connection to the sense of exploration isn't as evident, right? Because they're thinking, oh, I've got to compete for the highest spot. Oh. I will be perceived differently if I'm in this level of technique classes versus this one. And so I'd say that in the first instance sort of sets up a kind of tension.
Well, there's two things in that. I'm going to ask two questions at once. Mm-hmm. Pick either one. Sure. Okay. So one is there's this inherent challenge we have that, I think of anything you do in life, there are, I think, basic building blocks to it. So there is, not in everything, I shouldn't say everything, but in lots of spaces, there is an inherent ranking or order. And sometimes you can get the building blocks out of order, but there are an inherent set of pieces you have to get. And as humans, we tend to move through time linearly, mm-hmm. Even though we often cycle back. So there's a challenge in designing something where you're right. Even if I don't think of it as a ranking, the students are going to come in with different sets of dance skills. Mm-hmm. And the goal will be to get them sort of a more complete set of dance skills. And so there's a challenge, I think, in education of how do you recognize differences without ranking? Mm. Right? That's one thing that I have now a whole new set of things to think about. So I like that. The other thing is, and this is what I realized after you emailed me and I was thinking more about exploration, exploration is somehow only meaningful if you first have boundaries. Mm-hmm. Perhaps. I'm not sure I completely, right. Like and you said there's more room for exploration later in the program. And it made me think about students often, and kids, if you're a parent, often rebel against rules. But you can't rebel against rules if there aren't rules. You can't explore new things if there isn't a set of things you already have to go beyond. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you want to comment on either of those, pick one, but this sort of idea of how do we help students understand that identifying the set of things they have, I mean, we may need to do a better job of moving that away from ranking and just into this is the cluster of skills you have, here's another cluster of skills you should get. And this idea of here's the boundaries we're giving you to start with so you can explore and go beyond them.
And I think some of that comes from the idea of exploring within the boundaries that are within your own makeup,
right,
as opposed to comparatively.
Oh, I like that.
And for me, engaging the students to really take inventory in their own capacities without this need to reference them outside. And that's a hard thing to do.
That's really hard.
But interestingly, when students do begin to move towards, deepening their own sensibilities, their own knowledge, their understanding of how to not necessarily execute a movement, but how to really connect with the dimensions of their body in space, like just on that level, on that ground level.
Right.
And then building from there, as opposed to, this is what I'm supposed to look like. This is how many turns I'm supposed to do. This is how high I'm supposed to jump. But actually, what are my bodily mechanics and physiology? What is it? And then how can I scope beyond the bounds that I perceive myself as having? And that, I think, really tuning in to then explore outwardly.
Oh, I like that. And in that space, it seems, therefore, I wonder if because look, we do this, we have levels of class everywhere. I think in dance, the way you described it is probably more obvious. I mean, I think of my own child just going to a dance studio, right? Everything's level 1 ballet, level 2 ballet, level 3 ballet. But of course, we do that in a lot of our other classes. You're in intro-level writing, or you are in more advanced writing when you start out. And as a student, you take a writing test and you have a writing placement. I remember one of my daughters realizing only later in life, she goes, she shares, it was a point, 3 or 4 months into school where in first grade, her friends had noticed that the different color reading groups were actually different levels. She had thought they were all just in different colored reading groups, right? And then people were starting to compare, even in first grade, you're in the highest level of reading, you're in the lowest level of reading. And I really do wonder, is dance, do you feel like, is there a place, because we're thinking about this in physics, for some reflection of, do we have to think about it as levels and more, maybe we can do something more parallel or skill sets, and where we're all, like you said, figuring out your own internal state, but learning from each other in a more cooperative. I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, but I feel like we can move away from levels to skill sets and sharing.
That would be amazing. But yes, I think also the students come in with very different backgrounds in terms of dance. Some people have come from studios where they've actually been actively about competition. Right. And they come in with a wonderful energy, and I love those students, right? So they are very attuned to performance, really attuned to, energetically, exalting their best, right? And yet there's some aspects of that I want the students to kind of foster. Okay, what are the tenets that will then bring more color, more range to your song, if you will, as opposed to only the high note. What else is on that trajectory? So I think the idea of fostering an appreciation for different qualities of movement, of expressivity, and of skill, right? Because those that may have the most far-ranging skills may lack expressivity and be more so technical operators, right? Yeah. So on the other hand, you might have a bio major, you have all the technical skill and have no empathy and wants to be a healthcare professional.
Right. Yeah. No,
right? So like, how do we build in these other skills and layers of awareness that are also parts of learning?
Yeah.
Right? That need to be valued, that will give the currency going forward.
And I love that balance of intuition and technical skill. And I think many of our academic fields are a little bit driven, and I wonder how this is my last question about kind of this dance space and exploration. Do you feel there's an interesting challenge or pressure that comes from the fact that we live in sort of an environment that imposes grades upon us, right? That we have to, in principle, come up with grades, right? And we're kind of, if you think about that, we are the last moment in your life where you get grades the way we think of grades in academics, right? After that, you get evaluated, and you have to meet standards, but it's a whole different system, right? Like the way you get evaluated completely changes. Like we are the last tail end of grades, and I wonder if grades tend to drive towards these technical and skill side focus because they're sort of easier to identify and check off. Oh, you have these 6 technical skills, I can give you an A. You have these 4, I can give you a B. Whereas the more, I don't know, intuitive and expressive side, we get nervous about giving grades around. I don't know, does that resonate at all, or?
Yes, I mean, I think I'd like to be able to be in more conversation with students about their, but we can't do that. We have thousands and thousands and thousands of students. But the idea of grades being like the end all, right? This is where the buck stops, and this is your value. This is who you are. It's really not the whole picture at all. No. And I don't know what the answer is. You're the Vice Provost, Michael.
Well, I will be honest, I was just at a conference, and a lot of this came up, so I'm really thinking about it, and I think there are some ways forward. But it's both disappointing and heartening to know it infects dance as well as it does physics, because it means we can work together to solve it. But it's kind of, I was hoping there was a magic solution in the world of dance. But I've mentioned dance and physics. That was the second topic I wanted to talk to you about. I obviously love physics, or I wouldn't become a physics professor. I love dancing to various degrees. I'm good or bad at it. And I've loved going to your talks and presentations, and I'm going to brag for a moment. Everyone, I'm going to turn to the camera, should look up Amma, where she gives a talk and dances at the same time. Blew me away.
My TED Talk.
Yes, it's the TED Talk. That's true.
Okay.
That helps them find it.
Yes.
I was going to make them go on a wild goose chase, Amma. But when I think about and watching my daughter dance and do it, physics, we're about studying motion in many ways. That's the core of physics. And one way I think of dance is about exploring motion.
Yes.
Right? And that's not really a question, but I'm going to make it one, Amma. How does that, what do you take from that? Where would you like to go with this?
I am just going to tell you that the title of my next performance that we're going to give this summer is called Stories in Deep Time.
Okay.
And I was inspired to create this title for a performance that I don't know what it's going to be, because it's going to be an improvised performance.
Okay.
But our principal feature is looking at rhythm. But I'm coming back to physics because I am fascinated by science and scientists and how you will think and compartmentalize the world. But the idea that dance has a relationship with physics, that we are in our physical bodies, we are all engaged in levels of motion. And it would be fascinating if we could have more intersections between dance and physics, because I think it would open the field, both of physics and dance, to more possibility.
Yeah.
The ways in which we work with force and load and speed, I think there's a great opportunity for us to be able to enlarge conversations because we all start whatever discipline we are in from our bodies. Right?
Yeah.
Like, this is home for everyone.
No, I think that's true. You know, one thing that just struck me, so I think of, and I'm probably going to get it wrong, but sort of hip-hop type videos my kids show me on YouTube, broadly speaking. I may not be using the term exactly right. But when you watch some of these dancers, right, sometimes my first reaction is, was that just a video trick? Like, did that really happen? You know, that physical body motion. And part of it is the body is a very, very cool piece of physics because it can change its shape. And a lot of what we do in intro physics and stuff, we only focus for our students on things that don't change their shape. Right. Right? And so spinning is a fairly complicated thing. It's complicated enough if you can't change your shape. And now if you can change your shape, there's all sorts of interesting things that can happen. And what I've realized later in my teaching career is video is now cheap, affordable, and easy enough to do that you could start analyzing and looking at things that, in my mind, are way more interesting to students. And dance is a rich source of some of these fascinating physical movements.
So what would it be if we had, you had a large lecture class and you had a beginning ballet class, right? Right. Where the students were being taken through the fundamentals, and you were able to then intercept those particular moments in those class where the body is working with a certain type of concept, right? Well, and then turn that into the teaching moment, and then those complex ideas that you're extolling to the students are then they're looked upon as practical, realizable phenomena. Yeah. And then the dancer then understanding what's encoded in what they're doing can then also potentially help them find even more engagement in what they're doing. Like,
no, I think that's right. So there's that element, just the basic core physics, which I love. There's another piece you mentioned, which is, and it's interesting, the area of physics I went into, you mentioned compartmentalizing and science categorizing and doing things. We tend to break things down to their smallest pieces. That is what science likes to do. But you've also talked a lot about, and it's going to be our final topic when you've talked about embodiology, you've talked about fractal thinking, right? And my study is complex systems, right? And what I really talk about a lot is emergent properties. And so bubbles and foam are my favorite thing to talk about, because every molecule in a bubble or foam.
Do you remember that bubble I sent you, that picture?
Yes, you did.
It's so funny. I was like, I need to send this to Michael. I need to understand what's happening.
So they do amazing things. But every molecule in a bubble or foam is in a liquid state, a fluid state. It's a gas or a liquid. But a foam itself is a collection of bubbles that can behave very differently. It can behave like a solid. It can behave like a fluid. When you put the collection together, the whole is more than the sum of the parts. And that emergence is something that's always fascinated me in physics. And I think there's an interesting connection when I start thinking about there's an emergence in just a single dancer, because the body is doing much more complex things than the individual parts. But particularly now, if I go to the next level of choreography, like watching a collection of dancers, it's fascinating to me. I had to make the transition at some point in my life, because when you watch your kid compete, you mentioned competing dancers, all you do is watch your kid. And what you do is you miss the dance. Now when they're young, they're all doing the same thing. So it really doesn't matter that you just watch your kid. Right. But when it gets more engaged, the choreography becomes, and this ability to almost zoom out and zoom in. I'm curious, because when you're choreographing, thank you, a piece with multiple dancers, how do you think through, or how does it feel to be dealing with, you've got pieces, and at the end the sum's going to be different than the pieces? Like, I'm just curious about that process, because I think thinking about that is a concrete example of this sort of emergence behavior that would help our students who are very used to being reductionist in science to think about systems. So I'm just curious if it's something you've reflected on before. I just came up with the question now, so I didn't give it to you ahead of time.
Sure, that's fine. But choreography can emerge from so many different places. But the the ideas of moving people through space and creating patterns, creating accumulative sequences, creating counterpoints,
right,
where there's one energy that is not necessarily opposing, but it's working in a complementary oppositional way, right? And then that then produces its own effect. So there are many, many ways, many kinds of tools and ways that we work. But also what's really important in making choreography is the awareness that each dancer brings to that space.
Right.
So yes, there is the choreographer that has this sort of meta goal of creating this, but actually the development of a dancer's sensibilities is about their awareness of being part of the ensemble.
So how, like, I've just always wondered this, as a dancer in a larger number where it's all interrelated, like, as a human, just again, thinking of the body and the limits of our body, like how much and at what moments are you even aware of the full effect, or just maybe like your neighbors? Because I will tell you, a very big common theme in physics is, when is a system really just dominated by the neighbor-neighbor interactions? And when is it more long range? And the system is dominated by, like, I can detect, whether it's visually or through sound or whatever, as a system, I know what's happening way over there and there. And you get very different systems in physics if you're aware of the long or the short. And I would imagine that would be the same as a dancer in a piece.
Sure.
If I'm just watching my neighbors, or if I have a sense of the bigger piece. Does that happen much, do you think? Or
yes, and I would say it would depend on the choreography and what it is seeking to accomplish. You know, if you look at dancers that are working in very uniformed ways, they're really hyper aware of their spatial relationship between the person in front of them and behind, and staying consistent. They can't suddenly, have this explosive energy that's going to shunt them and shift the picture. But then there can also be another sense where you have a different type of unison, which isn't uniform, where conditioning oneself to the larger picture is actually part of the expressivity that the entire piece is conveying. So, I mean, this really, again, for me, connects into some of the ideas I'm really interested in, which is developing one's awareness, one's layers of awareness, and spatial, distal and proximal awareness, and what's in between at various integers is really interesting. It's like there's so much possibility in each of those layers.
Yeah, I mean, it just, something that struck me, this would be a cool class. I don't even know how I would develop it, but a class on short versus long range interactions where you had dancers and physicists working together. And some of it was what happens when you do an improvisation piece, where the rule is, as a dancer, you're only allowed to look at the person next to you. You can't pay attention to anything else, versus you're supposed to look 5 dancers out.
Well, let's
and
just
respond to that.
And let's just take this, because that makes me think about the world at large,
Right.
Michael. Sorry, I'm very much someone that, yes, I'm in dance, but I think about the world, as you know. But that idea that, in general, we do just that's our mode of being as human beings. Like, what's happening right here.
Yeah.
And that's normal, right? It's your community. But now we know that, everything from the butterfly effect, right? That everything affects everything.
Yeah.
And so, of course we're overwhelmed if we think about that. But on a level, how many degrees can we expand that's actually going to optimize the experience of life for those peoples in those other orbits that are impacting you.
And that, besides being just an awesome thought in itself, is a great segue to Embodiology. So I promised we'd get to that for our audience. We had you come in and talk to my leadership team and run a little mini workshop. I've seen you give talks at a couple of different places. I love the idea. I loved being part of the workshop. I found that very sort of energizing and exploring things in new ways. I'll just say, talk about it a little bit, because you've probably talked about it a ton, so I don't have to ask you a specific question.
Well, Embodiology is, it's both an approach to generating performance, and I say performance in the broadest sense, like
Right.
life is a performance.
Yes.
And it's also it's a tool that enables us to analyze performance, to analyze
Right.
what is taking place amongst groups of people. So in the training aspect of it, in the coaching or the workshop aspect, there are 6 principles that we are working from constantly. And it's to develop our layers of
Right.
awareness. So working from the self, the individual, to the interpersonal and the spatial. Right? So it's complex, but we work on it node by node to build our efficacy, to build our dexterity, to be able to zoom out, zoom in, and pay attention. So that's really what is exciting about Embodiology, is that I feel less like a teacher and more like a coach in that
makes
work.
sense.
And it's a possibility space. Just yesterday, Michael, I'll tell this story because it's really close to me. I had an interaction with a 1-year-old, and I was using one of the concepts from Embodiology, which is within the space of dynamic rhythm.
Right.
So dynamic rhythm from a West African perspective consists of our relationship with speech. So
Right.
speech and rhythm are inherently in the same space of understanding. So this 1-year-old couldn't speak. This 1-year-old was really upset, been bound, wasn't able to move because his mother was engaging in doing my hair. Poor child was like almost at a catatonic state. And, but not just holding it. And then we got to the end, so I could actually kind of gesture to the young child. And so I started doing a rhythm game, like clapping and enunciating, what I call prosody, which is the poetics of speech, intonation, pitch, duration. And I was clapping. He was fascinated. He changed within a space of 5 to 10 minutes from this catatonic state to being in play, to mirroring, to innovating.
Oh, amazing.
He started to teach me. He was enunciating word sounds, clapping, showing me. It was incredible.
Wow.
It was incredible.
Wow.
I'm like,
Well, I think the thing that fascinates me is I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like a lot of the core for this, for Embodiology, came out of your experience, if I remember correctly, with going to West Africa and
Yes.
learning more about rhythm.
yes.
And it really seems to be found, and it makes a lot of sense. Our body and our lives are all at the core rhythmic based.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the work began through research in Ghana, and that continues to be very much informed by my work looking at performance in the Ghanaian context. Ewe peoples who have very rich traditions of dance and music. And it really is part of the social fabric. It's almost like public health, right? Everyone has access to it, everyone participates, and it forms the social cohesion. So there's a very sophisticated ear, there's a very sophisticated way of engaging and recognizing everyone. And that's why I think Embodiology is powerful, because it's not just from recognizing an elite form of dance capacity, although it can be very virtuosic on one end.
Well, I tell you, not to interrupt, Amma, but when we get to those multiple rhythms and you're having me walk and clap at the same time, I consider that very virtuosic.
It is. But we are able to mount it like seed by seed.
Yeah.
And then what erupts is the joy.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's so true.
And with that joy, there's more possibility, right?
Yeah.
It's like indexing for possibility when we're engaging in something joyfully.
Well, I do think about it. I mean, I'm not obviously an expert in early human cultures, but I'm always fascinated by history and cultures across, what's common across humanity, what's different. And you just can't think of humans without, in my mind, thinking about dance and rhythm. It seems to be fundamental. And it fascinates me, just that interplay that's probably our first storytelling really was through dance and rhythm to each other as humans, as early tribes around the fire, wherever.
Pre-language is the utterance to speak, comes rhythm, then forth comes language,
Yeah.
right? So it's no wonder that there are cultures in the world that have persisted with this, because it's
Yeah.
not just having fun.
Yeah.
It is actually teaching you how to be a human being.
Yeah. No, which is, and when you think about, yes, it's not just having fun, but you mentioned joy. It's hard to, I don't know, I'm generally an optimistic person anyway, which can be annoying to those who are not. But it's hard not to move to a space of joy when you're actually, I think, in tune with your body and moving. Whether it's dance, whether it's sports, whether it's athletic, whether even, I mean, I even think these days, walking, but I even think people make fun of video gamers. Even there is a physicality to even video gaming where you're moving the controllers and it's your body and your mind engaging in something together. So I find that very, very exciting. So as we sort of just wrap up here, one last little thought, Amma, one chance to go with. What do you see maybe as the next frontier in embodiology?
Well, we're actually doing a program with the School of Nursing. Dr. Dawn Bounds, she's an assistant professor of nursing. We're actually working on a project to engage students in STEM
Very nice.
a study. So having them participate in an embodiology class over a period of 10 weeks to support their well-being, to support their capacity to flourish in their education. So that's coming up next. It's a pilot study that's been sponsored by the Samueli Institute. It's one of the pilot studies.
Perfect.
So I'm excited about that. And writing my book, and of
Yeah.
course I'm going to keep on with that.
Yeah.
Because we need the textual.
Right. You need the materials out there so it spreads.
Yes.
Yep.
And really, I'm really interested in the leadership aspect. When you opened up your team to a workshop, and I'm constantly learning, and that was a wonderful space to be able to see how this work can actually then help teams cohere.
Yeah.
I mean, the communication and the storytelling and the listening, the deep listening that followed on from that workshop. It was really...
No, it was great. It was really great for the team. Yeah. Well, as always, an absolute pleasure to chat. Even better that other people get to hear our conversation. And just thank you for taking the time to join me here.
My pleasure. Thanks.
You're welcome. So this has been Conversations with the Vice Provost. Thank you for watching and look forward to more videos.